Hello everyone, welcome to Just Invest Today. And today we're doing a Warren Buffett Berkshire Hathaway recap on this 2021 meeting. And guys, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of good quick tips, hindsight ideas, and everything going on for Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. This meeting was really good. It was long, but we're gonna get into it in this video and let's talk about it. So the first thing he goes through is he wants to remind you guys, these new investors, or everyone, people like kind of me, because I've only been like 3 years, everyone, all the new Robinhood investors, he wants to remind all the retail investors that it's not as easy as you think, right? So look at this chart right here. He goes over all the top 30 biggest companies, right now. And he's just going down this list. And then he's telling you he asks us the question, how many companies do you think will be here on this list in the next 30 years? Because before, in 1989, the last companies, the last companies that were on the list fell off the list. Look at this. Back in 1989, look at the top companies: Japan, US, Japan. Look at all these. In the industrial bank, like Fuji Bank, like Exxon, like look how all these companies switch. So guys, do we think the next generation of companies are going to be the Apples, the Facebooks, the Teslas? Like, are these the next generations of companies going to stay on that top market cap list? Because people think they can just put their money in anything and just let it grow, right? And then he goes back to an example about the cars. So all the new investors want to just rush into the market and get into these new high-flying stocks, right? But when you think about it, anytime there's a new market, no one knows who's the winner going to be. So he talks about how the car market had when the first Ford and all those cars started coming up, there was hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers making cars, right? And when you look till 2008, there was only 3 that stood out, like Ford and GM, and those companies went bankrupt, right? So just because there's something new, high-flying now, you don't know where that company's going to be 20, 30 years from now. So he's just warning all the new investors that, guys, you have to kind of know what you're doing and know what companies you're picking. So Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger is just reminding you of that, and that you got to be focused on the future. And just because you have these high-flying companies now, it doesn't mean 20 years from now, 30 years from now, those same companies are going to be there. So that was just pretty much the beginning of the meeting. Tell me what you guys think about that. What companies do you think are going to be here for the next 20, 30 years? And then I'm just going to go, everything I talk about right now, I'm just going to go over what I liked about what he said, things that kind of stood out to me. He said selling Apple and Costco were mistakes. He sold 6% of Apple, which he said was a mistake. He says that Charlie Munger says that you're doing too much. There's too much activity. And he's just Warren needs to listen to Charlie more, because Warren has been doing way too much activity in his account. So yeah, so that was pretty funny, because Charlie, once he buys something, he'll stick to that stock for 10, 15 years, no matter what. He is sticking his teeth clench on that stock. So that was a pretty interesting that he sold his at least 6% of Apple. What else? He talked about the airlines, him selling the airlines, him selling the banks, and how he would have sold it anyways too, right? So he's just saying how he sold that because he didn't know the future of those companies, and right, and he had to have remember guys, he had to have a huge cash pile because he has all these companies, right, that were just closing down and shutting down, and he didn't know what was going on. So honestly, I think that's why he was hesitant to deploy money, because this was a new situation. He didn't know if he was going to be able to handle all these companies, all his main private companies, with all the money he has, right? So he wasn't sure. So I think that's why he didn't deploy capital, because that's a huge question people keep asking. It's like, how come you didn't do more? Like, they did buy back some shares, but they didn't deploy as much capital as he probably wanted to, because it's hard to time the market, like the how far down the stocks are gonna go, right? It's hard to time that. Plus, he had to make sure he had a huge cash pile to make sure all his businesses were covered, because the government's not going to save him, knowing that Warren Buffett has all this money. So you got to take that into account. Oh yeah, and this was a huge one too. He was talking about the Federal Reserve. So he said the Federal Reserve 0% interest rates. So this is at an all-time low. And when you have 0% interest rates and you compare that to stocks, he's like, why would people not want to buy stocks right now? He says that probably Warren Buffett pretty much admitted that stocks are not cheap right now, because their interest rates are zero. You're not making any money on bonds or interest rates with the Fed. So who wouldn't be in stocks, right? So being in stocks is driving up the prices, but he's saying pretty much that like stocks aren't cheap because the interest rates are 0% right now, which was really interesting. Like, he didn't say stocks weren't cheap. He said, like, he knows they're overvalued, but if you compare it to the Federal Reserve in the interest rates, it doesn't look cheap. So that's a very interesting point that he mentioned. He's talking about how he has $100 billion in cash, and he's only getting $20 million on it, basically in a year. So basically, he's getting nothing on the cash, and this is all the Federal Reserve's doing, because the Federal Reserve wants you to spend your money. They want you to not like hoard it over there. So they're trying to get people to spend their money, get rid of their money. So he's basically saying that this is how pretty much the economy is going to be started up, with the Federal Reserve doing this. I don't know what the consequences is of the Federal Reserve doing this, but he knows that the consequences can be huge. Like, it can be like a huge thing in the future, but he doesn't know what, he doesn't know when. So that's a pretty big thing right there. Charlie Munger was talking about how all the retail investors like Robinhood and all of that stuff is all speculation and gambling. He talked about how Apple, when before the earnings report, how there were so many call and put options for 7 days, and he's just saying Robinhood is pretty much establishing like a casino, a gambling arena, which he says this will end very bad. Like, all of the speculation in the market and all this like just putting in your money, gambling, not knowing where the stock's gonna go, is gonna end bad, because you don't know when the lights are gonna turn off. Pretty much, like, it can happen anytime, and when that happens, a lot of people are gonna be left behind. Another question that was said in the meeting was actually talking about, what should I do with my money? Like, should we be buying these companies right now? Should we just be kind of patient on the sideline? And Warren Buffett talks about how much he has all this money on the side, $70-80 billion, after the fact that he can cover for the cost of his businesses. He has like around $80 billion. And he said he was buying companies that he actually kind of didn't. I was surprised with this answer. He was saying he was buying companies that he kind of didn't really know or have an advantage on the long term. So I think even Warren Buffett is actually going the extra mile and investing in companies that he knows about the company, he knows what it does, but he doesn't have any like specific advantage going into the company, knowing what he's buying. So even Warren Buffett is kind of feeling the pressure of like buying small companies or buying companies, because he has so much money and like so much money on the sidelines. So that was very interesting, and kind of brings you back to like what's happening in the market right now and what's going on. And Charlie Munger even said that this was the funniest thing. He said that Bernie won. Bernie won, meaning that like right now in the market is creating a lot of rich retail investors, because the interest rates are so low, people are just handing out money, and stocks are just booming year after year after year. So so Charlie's basically Bernie won. Like the people on the bottom are getting richer, and people are getting free money, and yeah, and like the stock investors now I think Charlie's a little jealous of the stock investors now because he's saying he's feeling that those guys are getting rich a little quicker than what happened back in the past. And you can see that in this environment, people are bidding up prices. People are paying so much for stocks, and stocks are just booming, right? And they're making 18, 19% on your investment. So Charlie was kind of like Charlie Munger was kind of a little bit jealous with that. I feel like so that was pretty funny. Two last things I thought were kind of interesting, were not really interesting but kind of funny, was that uh, there was a question about Tesla's Mars expedition and if Warren Buffett would not fund it, but actually, because Warren Buffett does insurance, if he would actually insure Tesla's expedition, and he would say, and one of his partners was like, hell no, no, we are not doing that. And then Warren Buffett was kind of more open to the idea of maybe insuring Tesla, or maybe putting or making sure that Elon Musk has skin in the game. So he puts him into the Tesla, the rocket ship, so he knows that, okay, now you can insure it. So you have skin in the game. If anything happens, you are at fault too. So you are covered. So that was pretty funny. And there was a whole joke about that. That was pretty interesting. And the last thing was about like if the Chinese government. So the last thing was about if the Chinese government will actually allow businesses to grow in, because remember, Charlie Munger invested in Alibaba, right? So there's a question about the Chinese government and then Jack Ma if they're gonna allow like businesses to grow, and he said that what China has done has been like really crazy when you think about it. He's basically saying China has made communism with a free market atmosphere, and this has generated huge businesses, and he would have never have thought that, but he has so much faith. He has faith in the government that the government will allow businesses to thrive and grow in the Chinese economy, because they're trying to take all the poor people out of poverty, and like 800 million people in China have been like secured to the middle class already. So he's saying that's what the Chinese government wants and needs. So that's was an interesting point of people who are saying that the Chinese government doesn't want business to grow, but he believes that the Chinese government wants businesses to thrive in China under the CCP. And lastly, I think Greg is going to be the successor. Charlie Munger kind of mentions it a little bit. He says that like, oh, what does he say? He says something about like the fact that he's gonna be able to maintain and like hold the kind of culture at Berkshire. So you can kind of see how he's gonna be those two, Ajit Jain and I think Greg Abel. They're gonna be the ones up front, right? And those are gonna be the ones running the culture after Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett leave, and then they're gonna have Todd and Ted being the investment practice. So I thought that was pretty interesting. They're really kind of set up for Greg to take over the helm once Warren leaves and Charlie Munger leaves too. So yeah, man, it's a good shareholder meeting. If you're interested, watch it yourself. You can probably get more things from it. But this is my quick synopsis of what happened during this shareholder meeting. So if you'd like the video, subscribe to my channel. I'll get back to you in the next video. Peace.